I stood alone in the Colorado State University parking lot, my black graduation cap crooked on my head, and my mechanical engineering degree clutched in my trembling hands. Tears streamed down my face as I watched families everywhere, hugging their graduates, taking photos, and celebrating 4 years of hard work together. My phone buzzed with a text message from my mother that made my stomach drop like a stone. "Hey, Troy, can you Venmo us $300? We're short on cash for the Super Bowl party catering and need it ASAP." The same parents who promised they would be here today but chose their annual football bash instead. Growing up in the suburbs of Denver, I learned early that my achievements would always take second place to my parents' social calendar. Margaret and Dale Thompson were the kind of people who lived for their reputation in the neighborhood. Every weekend brought another gathering, another excuse to show off their perfectly manicured lawn and their ability to throw the most talked about parties on Maple Street. When I made honor society in my junior year of high school, they missed the induction ceremony because Margaret had committed to a wine tasting event with her book club. I remember sitting in the auditorium scanning the audience for familiar faces and finding none. The other inductees had entire rows of family members beaming with pride, while I accepted my certificate to empty seats. Senior night for football came around that fall, and despite me being team captain and having my jersey retired, they showed up 40 minutes late because Dale's golf buddy was hosting an impromptu barbecue. I spent the ceremony watching the gate, hoping to see them arrive, while my teammates' parents made sure to get photos of their sons being honored. By the time Margaret and Dale finally appeared, the ceremony was over, and I was already in the locker room changing out of my uniform. High school graduation day should have been different. They swore they would be there early front row, ready to watch their son walk across the stage. Instead, they arrived 15 minutes after the ceremony started because Dale had insisted on finishing his round at the country club. I saw them slip into the back row just as I received my diploma, but there was no celebratory dinner afterward. They had reservations at the golf club that they could not break. When I earned a full academic scholarship to Colorado State University for mechanical engineering, something incredible happened. Suddenly, Margaret and Dale became the proudest parents in Denver. They told everyone at the grocery store, at their parties, at church functions. Their son was going to be an engineer, they bragged. Their brilliant boy was getting his education completely paid for because of his outstanding academic record. But in 4 years at CSU, they never visited my campus once. Not during orientation week when other parents helped their kids move into dorms. Not during homecoming when families toured the engineering labs. Not during any of the family weekends specifically designed for parents to see their children's college experience. They were always too busy with some social obligation that could not be rescheduled. I called home every Sunday without fail, updating them on my classes, my internships, my research projects. Margaret would listen with half attention while watching television, offering generic responses like, "That's nice, honey," or "Good for you." Dale would usually be in the garage working on some project and would shout hello through the phone without stopping what he was doing. The disconnect became clearer during my final semester when I started interviewing for engineering positions. I mentioned potentially moving to different states for work opportunities, and Margaret immediately launched into concerns about how that would affect their social standing. What would people think if their successful son moved away? How would they explain his absence at neighborhood events? It struck me then how differently they viewed my accomplishments. To me, graduating with honors in mechanical engineering represented 4 years of late nights, complex problem solving, and preparing for a meaningful career. To them, my success was a trophy they could display at cocktail parties, proof of their superior parenting skills they could casually mention to neighbors. The morning of graduation, I called to confirm they were coming. Margaret assured me they would be there, but she sounded distracted. I could hear party preparations happening in the background. Dale was shouting about moving tables, and I heard Margaret discussing food arrangements with someone. When I asked what was happening, she explained they were hosting their annual Super Bowl party that evening, but it would not interfere with graduation. 2 hours before the ceremony, I received a text that shattered something fundamental inside me. Margaret wrote that they were running behind with party setup and might miss the beginning of graduation, but they would try to make it for the important part. The important part. As if watching their son receive his engineering degree had an unimportant section they could skip. I called immediately, and Dale answered with party noise echoing behind him. When I explained how hurt I felt, he became defensive. This party had been planned for months, he argued. All their friends were expecting them to host. They had already spent money on food and decorations. Could I not understand how difficult it was to balance everything? Margaret got on the phone and tried a different approach. She promised they would absolutely be there, just maybe a few minutes late. They would sit in the back and slip out quietly afterward to return to their guests. After all, graduation was just a ceremony, but their annual Super Bowl party was a tradition their friends counted on. That conversation revealed everything I needed to know about where I ranked in their priorities. Their social obligations would always come first, and my milestones would always be afterthoughts to be squeezed in when convenient. Standing in that parking lot after walking across the stage to accept my degree alone, I finally understood the true nature of our relationship. They had never been proud of me as their son. They were proud of what I represented to their social circle. My achievements were their achievements to claim, but my actual experiences were mine to endure alone. The twist that broke my heart completely came when I called their house one last time before leaving campus. Margaret must have forgotten to hang up properly because I could hear the party happening in the background. Dale was telling a group of guests about how much money they had invested in my education and how they had sacrificed everything to support my dreams. He was describing elaborate care packages they had never sent and visits to campus they had never made. He told them about the emotional graduation ceremony they had just attended and how proud they felt watching their son succeed. Every word was a fabrication, a complete rewriting of our relationship, designed to make them look like devoted parents who had earned credit for my accomplishments. They were not just absent from my life, they were actively lying about their involvement while taking credit for work they had never done and sacrifices they had never made. The drive back to my apartment in Fort Collins felt surreal. I kept replaying the voicemail Margaret had left while I was walking across the graduation stage alone. Her voice was cheerful and casual, as if nothing unusual had happened. She explained that the catering company required immediate payment, and they were short on cash because of some unexpected expenses. Could I possibly Venmo them $800? She would pay me back as soon as possible, she promised. $800. The same amount I had saved from my part-time job at the campus engineering lab money, I had been carefully setting aside for my post-graduation transition. The audacity of asking for that specific amount made me wonder if Margaret somehow knew exactly how much I had available. When I arrived at my apartment complex, I sat in my car for 30 minutes still wearing my cap and gown, trying to process what had just happened. Other graduating seniors were loading cars with their parents heading to celebratory dinners, posting family photos on social media. I had nobody to call, nowhere to go, and parents who viewed me as an ATM rather than their son. My phone rang repeatedly with calls from Margaret. Each voicemail sounded more urgent than the last. The catering company was threatening to cancel their order. Their guests were already arriving. Could I please just send the money and they would work out repayment details later? When I finally answered, Margaret launched into a detailed explanation of their financial emergency. The Super Bowl party was costing more than expected because they had invited additional neighbors. The catering company had raised their prices at the last minute. Dale had forgotten to transfer money from their savings account to their checking account, and the bank was closed until Monday. But then Margaret said something that revealed her true mindset about our relationship. She mentioned that I owed them for all the support they had provided over the years, all the sacrifices they had made for my education, all the times they had put my needs before their own wants. Successful children have certain obligations to their parents. She explained, especially when those parents have invested so much in their futures. I was so shocked by this interpretation of our relationship that I could barely respond. What support? What sacrifices? What investment? They had not paid a single dollar toward my education. They had not attended a single important event in 4 years. They had not provided emotional support, practical guidance, or even basic parental presence during the most challenging period of my life. After ending that conversation, I decided to check my bank account balance before making any decisions about helping them financially. I wanted to verify exactly how much money I had available and calculate whether I could afford to lend them $800 without jeopardizing my own stability. What I discovered made my hands shake with rage and disbelief. My checking account showed the expected balance, but when I logged into my complete banking profile, I found an old joint savings account from high school that I had completely forgotten about. The account showed a current balance of only $300, but the transaction history revealed a devastating pattern of withdrawals over the past 2 years. $2,700 had been systematically removed from that account, in amounts ranging from $200 to $500. The withdrawal dates corresponded with various holidays, vacations, and major expenses my parents had mentioned during our Sunday phone calls. They had been treating my forgotten savings account like their personal emergency fund. I drove straight to their house, my graduation gown still hanging in my car, and my diploma sitting on the passenger seat. The Super Bowl party was in full swing when I arrived. Cars filled their driveway and lined both sides of the street. I could hear loud music, laughter, and the unmistakable sounds of people having a great time. Margaret answered the door wearing a festive football jersey and holding a glass of wine. She seemed genuinely surprised to see me, as if she had forgotten I might want to discuss her earlier request. When I demanded an explanation for the missing money from my savings account, her expression shifted from surprise to annoyance. Dale appeared behind her, also dressed in party attire and clearly irritated by my interruption. When I showed them the bank statements on my phone, he became immediately defensive. Those withdrawals were for family emergencies, he insisted. The air conditioning repair in July, Christmas presents in December, the vacation to Cabo in March that they had desperately needed for their mental health. Margaret added that I had never specifically said they could not access that account. Since it was still joint from when I was 17 years old, they technically had every right to use the money when necessary. Besides, Dale pointed out, I had been living in the dorms with free meals and housing. What expenses could I possibly have that justified hoarding money while my parents struggled with unexpected costs? The argument escalated when I demanded immediate repayment of every dollar they had stolen. Margaret accused me of being selfish and ungrateful. Dale said I had always been obsessed with money, instead of understanding that families help each other during difficult times. They had fed, clothed, and housed me for 18 years, they reminded me. This money was simply partial repayment for their decades of parental investment. But the most shocking revelation came when Dale mentioned that the graduation money I had received from relatives over the years had also been deposited into that joint account. My grandmother, Eleanor, had sent me $500 when I graduated high school. My Aunt Patricia had given me $300 for starting college. Various relatives had sent smaller amounts for birthdays and academic achievements. All of that money, gifts intended specifically for my education and future, had been funneled through the joint account and absorbed into my parents' personal spending. I had never seen a single dollar of those gifts because Margaret had insisted on depositing them safely, where they could not be accidentally spent on frivolous purchases. The scope of their financial manipulation was staggering. They had not only stolen money I had earned through work, but they had also intercepted gifts from family members who thought they were supporting my education. For years, they had been systematically draining every source of financial independence I might have developed. Standing in their foyer, surrounded by the noise and laughter of their Super Bowl party, I finally understood the true nature of our relationship. I was not their son. I was a resource they managed for their benefit, someone whose achievements they could claim and whose money they could access when needed. The Super Bowl party continued around us as our argument reached a crescendo in their entryway. I could see their guests through the archway leading to the living room, completely oblivious to the family crisis unfolding just feet away. Dale kept glancing nervously toward his friends, clearly worried about maintaining appearances, while Margaret grew increasingly hostile as I pressed for answers. When I threatened legal action if they did not repay every stolen dollar immediately, Margaret's demeanor changed completely. The pretense of maternal concern vanished, replaced by cold calculation. She informed me that I was being dramatic and unrealistic. Families share resources, she explained. What belonged to one member belonged to everyone, especially when children owed their parents for years of support and sacrifice. Dale took a different approach, becoming personal and cruel in ways I had never experienced before. He said I had always been an exhausting child who demanded constant attention and validation. My academic focus had been selfish, he claimed, because it prevented me from contributing to the household or understanding real-world financial pressures. According to him, my engineering degree was meaningless, without practical life experience, and my current outrage proved I was still immature and ungrateful. The confrontation reached its breaking point when I demanded they choose between their party and their relationship with their son. Either they would acknowledge their theft, commit to full repayment, and start treating me with basic respect, or I would pursue every legal option available and cut all contact permanently. Margaret actually laughed at my ultimatum. She pointed out that I was a 24-year-old college graduate with no job, no money, and no real-world experience. What exactly did I think I could do to hurt them? They had a house-established careers and a strong social network. I had a degree and empty threats. But Dale delivered the most devastating blow when he casually mentioned that he had already taken steps to protect their interests. Earlier that week, he had contacted 3 companies where I had been interviewing for engineering positions. He told them that I had some character issues they should know about before making hiring decisions. The room seemed to spin as he explained his sabotage with frightening calmness. He had called TechFlow Industries and mentioned concerns about my financial responsibility and tendency toward family conflicts. He had spoken with Green Energy Solutions and suggested they might want to do additional background checks given some personal issues in my past. He had contacted Aerospace Dynamics and hinted that I had a history of making false accusations against family members during stressful situations. Margaret added that they would continue reaching out to potential employers if I pursued legal action or tried to damage their reputation in the community. They knew people throughout the Denver business network, she reminded me. Dale's golf buddies included executives at major engineering firms. Her book club connections included HR professionals at several companies. If I wanted to work in Colorado, I needed to maintain a positive relationship with them. The calculated nature of their threat was breathtaking. They had not just stolen my money, they had preemptively attacked my ability to earn more. They were holding my entire professional future hostage to maintain their access to my resources and prevent accountability for their actions. Standing in their house, still wearing my graduation cap and gown like some ridiculous costume, I realized I was facing people who viewed me as an adversary rather than their child. They had weaponized our family relationship to maintain financial control and were prepared to destroy my career prospects to keep me dependent on them. The noise from the Super Bowl party continued in the background, a surreal soundtrack to the complete destruction of our family bond. Their guests were laughing, cheering, and enjoying the catered food that had been partially funded by money stolen from their host's son. The irony was not lost on me that they were celebrating their social success while simultaneously threatening to destroy mine. I left that house knowing that reconciliation was impossible. These were not parents who had made mistakes or acted impulsively during financial stress. These were predators who had systematically exploited our family relationship for their benefit and were prepared to escalate their attacks, rather than accept responsibility for their actions. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of rage, disbelief, and growing determination. They had declared war on my future, but they had also revealed the full extent of their manipulation. Now I knew exactly what I was fighting against, and I understood that half measures would never be sufficient. That night, while they continued their Super Bowl party, I began planning my escape from their control and my strategy for fighting back. They had taught me that family relationships based on exploitation were not worth preserving. And they had shown me that sometimes the people who claim to love you are actually your greatest enemies. I would not let them win. The week following graduation felt like living in a nightmare where every option led to another dead end. I spent days researching legal remedies for identity theft and financial fraud, but every attorney consultation revealed the same harsh reality: proving deliberate theft from a joint account would be extremely difficult, especially when my parents could claim they had verbal permission for emergency expenses. My job search became increasingly desperate as I realized the scope of Dale's sabotage. 2 of the companies where I had interviewed sent polite rejection emails citing concerns discovered during their reference check process. The third company, Aerospace Dynamics, simply stopped responding to my follow-up communications entirely. I reached out to my college friend Jake, who had graduated the previous year, and landed a position with a technology startup in Austin, Texas. When I explained my situation during a late-night phone call, Jake immediately offered to help. His company was expanding their engineering team, and while the salary would be modest, it would provide the fresh start I desperately needed. The prospect of leaving Colorado felt both terrifying and liberating. I had never lived outside my home state, but staying meant remaining within my parents' sphere of influence. They had made it clear they would continue sabotaging my opportunities until I submitted to their financial control. Jake connected me with his roommate Marcus, who worked in apartment leasing in Austin. Marcus explained the rental market and helped me identify several affordable options near Jake's office. The plan seemed straightforward: use my remaining savings for a security deposit and moving expenses, find temporary work, while waiting for the engineering position to finalize and rebuild my life away from my parents' toxic manipulation. But when I attempted to submit rental applications, I encountered an unexpected obstacle that made my stomach drop with familiar dread. My credit score had been destroyed. The first rejection came from a complex near downtown Austin. The leasing office explained that my credit report showed multiple delinquent accounts and significant outstanding debt that made me an unacceptable rental risk. Confused and panicked, I requested my complete credit report and discovered the horrifying truth. Over the past 2 years, my parents had opened 7 different credit cards using my personal information. Each card had been maxed out with purchases I had never made and payments I had never authorized. The debt totaled $23,400 across accounts I had never known existed. The purchases revealed the extent of their deception and the casual cruelty of their theft. They had bought a hot tub for their backyard using a store credit card opened in my name. They had purchased expensive outdoor furniture, a new sound system, and upgraded appliances for their kitchen. Margaret had used one card exclusively for her book club activities, wine purchases, restaurant meals, and weekend trips with her friends. Most devastating was discovering that Dale had used my credit to cover gambling losses. One card showed regular cash advances totaling over $8,000, all withdrawn at various casinos in Black Hawk and Central City. The payment history revealed a pattern of minimum payments, followed by additional maxed-out advances, creating a cycle of compounding debt that had spiraled completely out of control. I called the credit card companies immediately, but my options for dispute were limited. Since the accounts had been opened using my correct personal information and had been actively managed for months, proving fraud would require police reports and extensive documentation. The customer service representatives explained that resolving identity theft cases typically took 6 to 12 months, during which time the negative marks would remain on my credit report. The scope of my parents' betrayal extended far beyond the money they had stolen from my savings account. They had systematically destroyed my financial credibility and created legal obligations that could follow me for years. Even if I successfully disputed the fraudulent accounts, the damage to my credit history would limit my housing options, employment opportunities, and financial independence for the foreseeable future. My escape plan to Austin suddenly seemed impossible. No legitimate apartment complex would approve an applicant with my credit profile. No employer would offer competitive compensation to someone with significant financial problems. Even if I found housing, I would be starting my adult life carrying massive debt that I had not incurred for anything beneficial. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by boxes I had optimistically started packing for my move to Texas. The walls were covered with academic awards, internship certificates, and photos from college that represented 4 years of hard work and careful planning. All of that effort had been undermined by parents who viewed my identity as a tool for their financial convenience. The most heartbreaking realization was understanding how long they had been planning this exploitation. Opening credit cards required advanced planning and careful execution. They had been systematically stealing my identity while I was focused on my education creating financial obligations, while I believed I was building toward independence. I called Jake to explain why my move to Austin would have to be postponed indefinitely. Hearing myself describe the credit card fraud made the situation feel even more surreal and devastating. Jake was supportive and angry on my behalf, but we both understood that my situation required legal intervention before I could consider relocating. The conversation ended with Jake promising to keep the job opportunity open as long as possible while I worked to resolve my credit issues. His kindness made the contrast with my parents' cruelty even more painful. A friend I had known for 4 years was willing to help rebuild my life, while my own parents had spent 2 years actively undermining my future. That night I made a decision that would change everything. I could not fight this battle alone, and I could not allow my parents to continue victimizing me or potentially harming others. I needed allies' legal support and evidence that would make their crimes undeniable. It was time to stop thinking like their son and start thinking like their adversary. My first step toward fighting back came through Professor Rodriguez, my senior design instructor, who had become a mentor during my final year at Colorado State University. When I explained my situation during what was supposed to be a casual post-graduation coffee meeting, his reaction was immediate and fierce. He had worked with hundreds of engineering students over his career, but he had never encountered such systematic family exploitation. Professor Rodriguez connected me with Sarah Chen, an attorney who specialized in family financial fraud, through the university's legal aid clinic. Sarah had previously worked as a prosecutor focusing on elder abuse and identity theft before transitioning to victim advocacy. During our first meeting, she explained that my case had several strong elements: clear financial harm, identity theft, and a pattern of deceptive behavior that suggested ongoing criminal activity. But Sarah needed substantial documentation to build an effective case. Bank records, credit reports, and communication evidence would be essential, but witness testimony could provide crucial context about my parents' behavior patterns. She suggested I contact family members who might have observed suspicious activities or experienced similar treatment. That advice led me to reach out to my Aunt Patricia, my father's younger sister, who had been mysteriously absent from family gatherings for the past 3 years. I had always wondered why Patricia stopped attending holiday celebrations, but my parents had deflected questions by mentioning vague disagreements and personality conflicts that made family events uncomfortable. When I called Patricia and explained what had happened, her initial response was stunned silence, followed by a string of creative profanity that would have impressed my engineering classmates. But then, she said something that made my hands tremble as I took notes. "Troy, I have been building a case against your parents for 2 years. They have been stealing from your grandmother Eleanor, and I have been gathering evidence to stop them. Patricia requested an immediate meeting at a coffee shop in Boulder, halfway between my apartment and her home in Longmont. She arrived carrying a thick folder of documents and wearing the grim expression of someone who had been carrying a terrible burden alone for too long. What Patricia revealed during that 3-hour conversation fundamentally changed my understanding of my parents' criminal behavior. I was not their first victim. I was not even their primary victim. They had been systematically exploiting my grandmother Eleanor, who had been living in a memory care facility since being diagnosed with dementia 4 years earlier. Dale had been designated as Eleanor's financial power of attorney. When her condition worsened, a responsibility that gave him legal access to her accounts for legitimate care expenses. But Patricia's investigation revealed that he had been using that access to steal inheritance money that was supposed to be preserved for family members, including Patricia, me, and my cousins. The evidence Patricia had collected was staggering in its scope and detail. Bank statements showed regular transfers from Eleanor's accounts to my parents' personal checking account, always just under the $10,000 reporting threshold that would trigger automatic scrutiny. Over 18 months, they had stolen $73,000 from Eleanor's estate. But the most damning evidence came from forged documents Patricia had obtained through her own legal proceedings. Dale had created fake invoices for Eleanor's care expenses, inflating legitimate bills and adding completely fictional services to justify larger withdrawals. He had forged Eleanor's signature on legal documents that transferred ownership of valuable family heirlooms and investments to his personal control. Patricia showed me photographs of items that had disappeared from Eleanor's room at the memory care facility. A vintage diamond ring that had belonged to my great-grandmother. A collection of rare coins that Eleanor had inherited from her father. Antique furniture that Dale had claimed was being moved to storage, but had actually been sold through estate auction houses. The pattern of exploitation was identical to what I had experienced: systematic theft disguised as family financial management, followed by aggressive defensiveness when questioned and threats of retaliation if victims pursued accountability. Patricia had been trying to build a legal case alone, but she needed additional evidence to demonstrate that Dale's crimes extended beyond elder abuse into broader identity theft and fraud. My credit card documentation provided exactly the pattern evidence Patricia needed to prove ongoing criminal behavior. Combined with her grandmother abuse case, we now had sufficient proof that my parents were career criminals who targeted vulnerable family members for financial exploitation. But Patricia revealed one more crucial piece of information that changed everything about our legal strategy. During her investigation, she had discovered that Dale was also serving as treasurer for the Colorado Veterans Housing Initiative, a nonprofit organization that provided emergency assistance and transitional housing for disabled veterans. Patricia suspected that Dale might be stealing from the veterans' charity using the same methods he had employed to exploit Eleanor. Nonprofit financial records were public information, and Sarah Chen could request auditing documentation that might reveal additional criminal activity. If Dale was embezzling from a veterans organization, his charges would escalate from state-level fraud to federal crimes, with significantly more serious penalties. More importantly, stealing from veterans would generate the kind of media attention and public outrage that would make my parents' other crimes impossible to ignore or minimize. As we prepared to leave the coffee shop, Patricia made me promise that I would not warn my parents about our investigation. They had already demonstrated willingness to escalate their threats and sabotage when confronted directly. Our advantage lay in building an overwhelming case before they realized the scope of evidence being assembled against them. For the first time since graduation day, I felt genuine hope about my situation. I was no longer fighting alone against parents who held all the advantages. I was part of a team with legal expertise, documented evidence, and a strategy designed to hold them accountable for years of criminal behavior. They had taught me that family relationships could be weapons used for exploitation and control. Now I would teach them that those same relationships could be tools for justice and protection. Working with Sarah Chen and Patricia, we filed comprehensive charges against my parents within 6 weeks of our initial meeting. The documentation package included identity theft charges for the fraudulent credit cards, elder abuse charges for stealing from Eleanor, and financial exploitation charges for the systematic theft from my savings account. Sarah had also submitted a formal complaint to the Colorado Attorney General's office, requesting investigation of Dale's role as treasurer for the Colorado Veterans Housing Initiative. Initial review of the nonprofit's financial records revealed concerning discrepancies that warranted deeper investigation. The first indication that our legal strategy was working came when my parents received official notice of the charges. Dale called my cell phone 17 times in one afternoon, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that range from attempts at negotiation to outright threats about destroying my reputation permanently. Margaret sent a series of text messages that revealed their panic and their continued inability to accept responsibility for their actions. She claimed I was being manipulated by Patricia, who had always been jealous of their success and stability. She insisted that all their financial decisions had been made with my best interests in mind, and that involving lawyers would hurt the entire family's reputation. But their most telling response came when they hired an expensive defense attorney and immediately began liquidating assets to cover legal expenses. If their actions had been legitimate family financial management, as they claimed they would not need aggressive legal representation and emergency funding for their defense. The breakthrough in our case came when the Colorado Attorney General's investigation uncovered evidence of systematic embezzlement from the veterans' charity. Dale had been creating fictional expense reports for housing assistance programs that did not exist, pocketing donations intended to help disabled veterans secure stable housing. The scope of the veterans' charity theft was even larger than his exploitation of Eleanor. Over 3 years, Dale had stolen $112,000 from an organization that provided emergency assistance to some of Colorado's most vulnerable citizens. The stolen money had funded my parents' lifestyle upgrades, vacation expenses, and gambling activities, while veterans struggled with homelessness and housing insecurity. When the veterans' charity story broke in the Denver Post, it ignited exactly the kind of public outrage Patricia had predicted. The article detailed Dale's theft from disabled veterans, while highlighting the irony that he had been simultaneously stealing from his own family members. Social media response was immediate and furious, with veterans advocacy groups demanding maximum prosecution. But the story that truly changed everything was written by a reporter who had investigated similar charity fraud cases. Her follow-up article connected Dale's veterans' charity theft to the broader pattern of family exploitation, including details about Eleanor's elder abuse case and my identity theft experience. The article presented my parents as serial predators who had spent years targeting vulnerable people for financial exploitation. It described the sophisticated methods they had used to steal from a dementia patient, their own son, and disabled veterans who trusted their charity to provide legitimate assistance. The public response exceeded anything I had anticipated. My high school and college communities rallied around me on social media, sharing stories of my parents' manipulative behavior that I had never realized others had noticed. Teachers described how Margaret had taken credit for my academic achievements while never attending school events. Classmates remembered how Dale had bragged about expenses he claimed to be covering while I worked part-time jobs to pay for basic necessities. The most powerful support came from other family members who had experienced similar treatment but had remained silent out of loyalty or fear. Cousins shared stories of graduation gifts that had been intercepted and never delivered. Family friends described witnessing my parents' cruel treatment of Eleanor before her dementia diagnosis. Local news stations picked up the story, and the coverage went viral on platforms focused on family justice and elder abuse awareness. The narrative that emerged was clear and damning. Margaret and Dale Thompson were not loving parents who had made mistakes during financial stress. They were calculating criminals who had spent years exploiting family relationships for personal gain. The media attention destroyed their social standing completely. Margaret lost her position at the elementary school, where she had worked as an administrative assistant after parents complained about having a convicted identity thief working around their children's personal information. Dale was terminated from his accounting firm when clients learned about his embezzlement conviction and demanded reassignment of their accounts. Their neighborhood social network abandoned them entirely. The same friends who had attended their Super Bowl party began actively avoiding them at community events. Their country club membership was revoked. Their church asked them to find a different congregation. The public humiliation was comprehensive and permanent. My parents had built their entire identity around social status and community reputation. Watching that foundation crumble under the weight of their exposed crimes provided a satisfaction I had not expected to feel. But the most meaningful support came from unexpected sources. Veterans who had been helped by the housing charity before Dale's theft reached out to thank me for exposing his crimes. Elderly care advocates praised our legal strategy for holding family financial abusers accountable. Other young adults shared their own stories of parental exploitation and expressed gratitude for seeing someone fight back successfully. The federal charges against Dale were finalized when investigators discovered additional evidence of mail fraud and tax evasion related to his charity theft. Stealing from a veterans organization carried enhanced penalties that could result in significant prison time rather than probation and financial restitution. Margaret faced state charges for her role in the identity theft and elder abuse, but her cooperation with investigators earned her a plea agreement that involved probation community service and mandatory financial restitution. She also agreed to testify against Dale regarding his charity embezzlement in exchange for reduced charges. As the legal proceedings continued, I watched my parents' carefully constructed life disintegrate under the consequences of their own choices. They had taught me that actions have consequences, and that family members who exploit each other deserve exactly the justice they receive. The final legal resolutions came 18 months after I had stood alone in that graduation parking lot. Dale received a federal sentence of 18 months in prison for embezzling funds from the Colorado Veterans Housing Initiative, followed by 3 years of supervised probation and an order to pay full restitution to both the veterans' charity and Eleanor's estate. Margaret's state charges resulted in 2 years of probation, 400 hours of community service, specifically working with elder abuse prevention programs and mandatory financial restitution. Her cooperation with federal investigators had reduced her potential prison sentence, but she would spend the next several years working to repay the money she had helped steal. The identity theft charges against both my parents were resolved through restitution and the complete clearing of my credit report. Sarah Chen had negotiated agreements with all the credit card companies that removed every fraudulent account from my credit history and restored my financial standing to exactly where it should have been before their theft. But the most meaningful resolution came from an unexpected source. During one of Eleanor's increasingly rare moments of mental clarity, she had recognized Patricia during a visit and made a startling revelation. She had suspected Dale's theft for months before her dementia worsened and had secretly worked with her original attorney to update her will and estate planning. Eleanor had removed Dale entirely from her inheritance and had designated Patricia and me as equal beneficiaries of her remaining estate. She had also established a trust fund specifically intended to help family members recover from any financial abuse they might suffer. Eleanor's foresight meant that my parents' theft had ultimately failed to achieve their long-term financial goals. My inheritance from Eleanor provided the resources I needed to finally make my move to Austin. Jake's technology company had kept the engineering position open, and I was able to relocate with sufficient savings to establish genuine independence. The job focused on renewable energy applications, specifically wind turbine optimization, which aligned perfectly with my academic background and personal interests. Living in Texas provided the geographic distance I needed to rebuild my life without constant reminders of my parents' betrayal. Austin's technology community was welcoming and supportive, and I found friendships based on mutual respect rather than family obligation or social convenience. But the most satisfying part of my recovery was establishing the Eleanor Thompson Educational Foundation, a scholarship program funded partially through my inheritance and designed to help students from dysfunctional families pursue higher education without financial exploitation. The foundation provided not just financial assistance, but also legal support and counseling resources for young adults dealing with family financial abuse. The scholarship program attracted attention from college counselors and family advocacy organizations throughout Colorado and Texas. Applications came from students whose stories reminded me of my own experience, talented young people whose educational achievements were being exploited by parents who viewed their children's success as personal financial opportunities. Each scholarship recipient represented a victory over the kind of family exploitation I had experienced. These students would graduate without the burden of fraudulent debt family theft or sabotaged career prospects. They would enter adulthood with the financial independence and emotional support necessary to build healthy relationships and successful careers. Working with these scholarship recipients taught me that my parents' treatment was not normal family behavior that I had misunderstood or overreacted to. Their systematic exploitation was criminal behavior that deserved exactly the consequences they had received. Helping other students avoid similar exploitation validated my decision to pursue justice rather than family reconciliation. The life lesson that emerged from this experience was both painful and liberating. Family relationships that require you to accept abuse, theft, or exploitation are not genuine relationships worth preserving. True family members celebrate your achievements without stealing credit or demanding financial compensation. They support your independence rather than sabotaging your opportunities for control. Setting boundaries with toxic family members is not cruelty or betrayal. It is necessary self-protection that allows you to build authentic relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care. Sometimes the healthiest choice is complete separation from people who view your existence as a resource to be managed rather than a life to be supported. My new life in Austin included supportive friendships, meaningful work, developing sustainable energy technology, and the peace that comes from knowing I had broken the cycle of exploitation that had defined my family relationships. I built connections with people who valued my success because they cared about my well-being, not because they could claim credit for my achievements. The most unexpected gift was discovering that standing up to family abusers inspired other people to examine their own relationships and set healthy boundaries. Former classmates reached out to share their own stories of family exploitation and to ask for advice about pursuing accountability. The ripple effects of fighting back extended far beyond my personal recovery. 2 years after graduation, I received a letter from Dale while he was serving his federal sentence. He attempted to apologize and requested a meeting to discuss rebuilding our relationship when he was released from prison. I threw the letter away without finishing it. Some relationships cannot be repaired because the foundation was never genuine to begin with. Margaret occasionally attempted contact through social media or mutual family connections, usually around holidays, when she claimed to miss our family traditions. I blocked every attempt at communication and made it clear to relatives that I had no interest in reconciliation or updates about her situation. My choice to maintain complete separation from my parents was not based on anger or revenge. It was based on the practical understanding that people who have demonstrated willingness to steal your identity, sabotage your career, and exploit your achievements for their benefit will never become trustworthy family members through apologies or time. Instead, I built chosen family relationships with friends, colleagues, and scholarship recipients who understood that real love involves supporting each other's independence and celebrating each other's success without hidden agendas or financial expectations. The Scholarship Foundation continued growing, and we expanded our services to include legal aid for students dealing with family financial abuse and counseling support for those recovering from toxic family relationships. The foundation became my way of transforming a painful personal experience into hope and practical assistance for others facing similar challenges. Looking back on that graduation day, when I stood alone in the parking lot, I realized that my parents had given me an unexpected gift. Their betrayal had forced me to develop the strength, independence, and wisdom necessary to build a life based on authentic relationships and genuine achievement. Their attempt to exploit my success had ultimately freed me from their control and taught me what healthy family relationships should look like. The young man who had cried in that parking lot had been devastated by the loss of parents he thought he knew. The adult I became understood that I had never actually had those parents to begin with. What I had lost was an illusion, and what I had gained was the truth necessary to build a life worth living. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice to cut ties with family members who were more harmful than helpful to your life? Sometimes the people who claim to love us most are actually the ones holding us back from reaching our potential. I would love to hear your thoughts about setting boundaries with toxic family relationships in the comments below. If this story resonated with you or helped you think differently about family dynamics and personal boundaries, please give it a like and share it with someone who might benefit from hearing that they are not alone in dealing with family exploitation. Your support helps these stories reach people who need to know that fighting back against family abuse is possible and necessary. Consider subscribing if you want to hear more stories about overcoming difficult family situations and building the strength to create the life you deserve. Sometimes the most important family members are the ones we choose for ourselves, and every story of someone breaking free from toxic relationships inspires others to examine their own situations and make healthy choices. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting content that tackles difficult family topics with honesty and hope. I wish you the courage to build relationships that celebrate your achievements rather than exploit them, and the wisdom to know that choosing your own well-being over family expectations is not selfish but necessary.